Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is the hidden reality of medieval people. You get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The hidden reality of medieval people. The medieval era. A period of history that we often imagine through stories of castles, kings, knights, and battles. But behind these famous images was the daily life of millions of ordinary people whose stories were rarely written in history books. How did medieval people survive? What did they eat? How did they work? What were their families' fears, struggles, and dreams like? Today, we will look at the hidden reality of their lives. The life of medieval people was difficult, but it was not only a story of suffering. There was also happiness, celebration, family, faith, and an incredible determination to survive. Many people call the Middle Ages a dark period, but the reality was much more complicated. During this time, human knowledge, technology, culture, and society were slowly changing. However, the life of an ordinary farmer was completely different from the life of the powerful. Most people lived in villages. Their day usually began with the rising sun. There were no clocks like today, so nature itself controlled their schedule. From morning until evening, they worked hard. Farming the land, taking care of animals, and collecting crops were major parts of their lives. There were no modern machines. People depended on their own strength, simple tools, and the power of animals to survive. For a medieval farmer, the land was not just a source of income. It was the foundation of their entire existence, but one of their greatest fears was nature itself. A bad harvest did not simply mean less food. It could mean hunger and even the threat of starvation. A lack of rain, too much rain, or extreme cold could completely change a person's future. Their food was also very simple. Bread was one of the most important foods in medieval life. Along with bread, people ate grains, vegetables, beans, and sometimes meat. But not everyone had the same diet. Kings, nobles, and wealthy families enjoyed a much wider variety of food. Ordinary people often had meals based on what was available and affordable. Their clothing was also part of their daily struggle. Unlike today, clothes were not mainly about fashion. They were made to protect the body from cold weather and harsh conditions. Poor families often used the same clothes for many years. Buying new clothing was a luxury that many could not afford. In medieval society, the circumstances of a person's birth often decided their future. The child of a farmer would usually become a farmer. The child of a noble family would grow up closer to wealth and power. Society was divided into different classes. At the top were kings and nobles. Below them were warriors, religious figures, craftsmen, and ordinary workers. For common people, opportunities were limited. Yet they still found meaning in their lives. Family was one of the most important parts of Medieval society. Several generations often lived together under the same roof. Children learned responsibilities from a young age. Childhood was not the same as it is today. Many children started helping their families with work early in life, but that does not mean their lives had no happiness. They played, listened to stories, sang songs, and joined festivals. People in every era have searched for moments of joy. Medieval people were no different. Religion and belief were also central parts of their lives. Many people believed that everything happening around them was connected to divine will. Faith gave them hope, but it also shaped many rules of society. One of the biggest challenges of medieval life was medicine. There were no modern hospitals, advanced medicines, or scientific treatments like today. Even a simple illness could become dangerous. People used natural remedies, herbs, and traditional knowledge to treat sickness. Their understanding of diseases was often limited, but they used the knowledge they had to survive. The reality of the Middle Ages was not only the story of kings and wars, it was the story of ordinary people. Their hard work, their struggles, and their determination to continue living. The people whose names never appeared in history books were the ones who helped build and maintain society. Because history was not created only by rulers, it was created by millions of ordinary people who worked, suffered, loved, and survived. Their lives remind us that humans, in any time and any situation, always find a way to continue. The daily life of medieval people was built around survival. Every morning brought new responsibilities, and every season brought new challenges. For most people living during the Middle Ages, life was connected to the rhythm of nature. Spring meant planting crops. Summer meant maintaining the fields. Autumn meant harvesting. And winter meant preparing for the cold months ahead. There was no modern understanding of weather forecasting, so people had to depend on experience and tradition. A single mistake in farming could affect an entire family for months. The village was the center of ordinary medieval life. Most people did not travel far from the place where they were born. Roads were often difficult, dangerous, and slow. A journey that takes a few hours today could take days or even weeks in medieval times. Because of this, villages became almost like small worlds of their own. People knew their neighbors, shared resources, worked together, and depended on each other during difficult times. But village life was not always peaceful. Disagreements over land, animals, debts, and responsibilities were common. Without modern legal systems, conflicts were often handled by local leaders or community traditions. For many peasants, the relationship with the landowner shaped their entire existence. A system known as feudalism influenced much of medieval Europe. Under this system, powerful nobles controlled large areas of land, and many farmers worked on those lands in exchange for protection and the right to live there. However, this protection came with obligations. Farmers often had to give part of their harvest, work certain days on the Lord's land, and follow strict rules. Their lives were connected to a social system where freedom was limited. Yet medieval people were not simply powerless. They developed skills, traditions, and communities that helped them survive. Craftsmen played an important role in medieval society. Blacksmiths, carpenters, weavers, and builders created the tools and objects people needed every day. A blacksmith was not just someone who made weapons. They created farming tools, horseshoes, household items, and many other essential objects. A skilled craftsman could become respected in the community. Markets were also important parts of medieval life. On certain days, people gathered to buy and sell goods. Farmers brought food, craftsmen sold their products, and travelers shared news from other places. These markets were not only about trade. They were places where people exchanged stories, information, and ideas. For ordinary medieval people, stories were one of the main forms of entertainment. Books were rare and expensive because they had to be copied by hand. Most people could not read or write. Instead, they listened to storytellers' songs, legends, and tales passed from one generation to another. These stories carried history, lessons, beliefs, and imagination. The sound of music was also part of medieval life. People used simple instruments during celebrations and gatherings. Music helped people forget their struggles for a moment and enjoy life. Festivals were another important part of society. Religious festivals, seasonal celebrations, and local events gave people a chance to come together. During these moments, even those with difficult lives could experience happiness and community. Marriage and family relationships were also different from today. Marriage was often connected to family responsibilities, economic needs, and social traditions. For wealthy families, marriage could be a way to create alliances. For ordinary people, it was often connected to survival and building a household. Love existed, but relationships were influenced by the realities of medieval society. Children were considered valuable members of the family because their help was important for daily work. However, childhood was dangerous. Many children faced illnesses that could be life-threatening. Medical knowledge was limited, and survival was not guaranteed. This made family relationships especially meaningful. Parents valued their children deeply because every life was precious in a world filled with uncertainty. The medieval world was also a place of strong contrasts. While kings lived in castles surrounded by luxury, many ordinary people lived in simple homes made from wood, mud, and natural materials. A castle represented power and wealth. A small village house represented survival, but both were part of the same world. The true history of the Middle Ages is not only about those who ruled. It is also about those who planted crops, built homes, raised families, created tools, and kept society moving forward. Millions of unnamed people carried the weight of history on their shoulders, and their hidden reality reveals something important. The past was not only made by famous names, it was made by ordinary humans trying to live, love, and survive. One of the most misunderstood parts of medieval life is the idea that ordinary people lived without knowledge or curiosity. In reality, medieval society was full of people who observed the world around them learned from experience, and passed their knowledge to future generations. Their understanding of the world was different from ours, but they were constantly trying to improve their lives. A farmer understood the behavior of animals, the signs of changing seasons, and the condition of the soil. A craftsman understood materials, measurements, and techniques that took years to master. Knowledge did not only exist in books, it existed in the hands and minds of ordinary people. Homes in the Middle Ages were very different depending on a person's social position. A wealthy family might live in a large stone building, while a poor family often lived in a small house made from simple materials. Many ordinary homes had only a few rooms. The same space could be used for cooking, sleeping, working, and spending time with family. Privacy was limited. Several family members often shared the same area. Furniture was simple. A bed, a table, a few chairs, storage containers, and basic household items were considered important possessions. For many people, owning too many things was impossible. Every object had value because replacing it was difficult. The fireplace was the center of many homes. It provided warmth, light, and a place to prepare food. But it also created dangers. Smoke filled the air and fires could spread quickly in villages where many buildings were made from wood. Cleanliness in medieval times is often misunderstood. People did care about cleanliness, but their methods were different. They washed when they could, cleaned their homes, and tried to maintain personal hygiene. However, they lacked modern sanitation systems. Cities especially faced serious problems. As populations grew, waste management became a major challenge. Streets could become dirty, and poor sanitation contributed to the spread of diseases. Medieval cities were crowded places. Unlike villages, cities brought together large numbers of people. Merchants, craftsmen, workers, travelers, and officials all lived close together. This created opportunities for trade and cultural exchange. But it also created risks. When disease appeared, it could spread quickly among crowded populations. One of the greatest fears of medieval people was illness. A small injury could become dangerous. An infection could turn into a life-threatening problem. People relied on healers, herbal knowledge, and traditional practices. Some treatments were effective because they came from experience. Others were based on beliefs that modern science does not support. But the goal was always the same: to survive. The role of religion in medieval life cannot be ignored. Faith influenced how people understood birth, death, nature, and their place in the world. Religious institutions were among the strongest organizations of the time. They were not only places of worship, they also preserved knowledge, provided charity, and influenced education. Many religious communities copied books by hand, protecting writings that might otherwise have disappeared. This work helped preserve important ideas from the past. Education, however, was not equally available to everyone. Most ordinary people did not receive formal schooling. Learning usually happened through family, work, and practical experience. A child learned by watching adults. A future farmer learned farming. A future craftsman learned a trade. A future soldier learned combat skills. Life itself was their classroom. The medieval world was also shaped by conflict. Wars between kingdoms were common. But for ordinary people, war was not a heroic story. It often meant fear, destruction, and uncertainty. When armies moved through villages, civilians could lose homes, crops, and security. The effects of political decisions were often felt most strongly by ordinary people. Yet even in difficult times, communities continued. People rebuilt houses, replanted fields, and started again. This ability to recover was one of the greatest strengths of medieval society. They lived in a world with many dangers, but they adapted. They created families, traditions, and communities that allowed humanity to continue. The hidden reality of medieval people is not simply a story of hardship. It is a story of resilience. A story of people who lived without modern comforts, but still experienced emotions that are familiar to us today. They had hopes, they had fears, they searched for happiness, they wanted a better future. And in many ways, their dreams were not so different from ours. The lives of medieval people were shaped by the world they lived in, a world where survival depended on cooperation, patience, and the ability to adapt. Unlike today, where many people can choose different careers, move to different places, and change their lifestyles, medieval people were usually tied to their environment. The place where they were born often became the place where they would spend their entire lives. Travel was not impossible, but it was difficult. Roads were often unsafe, transportation was slow, and journeys required preparation. Travelers faced many dangers, including harsh weather, accidents, and criminals. For ordinary people, traveling far away was rare. However, merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, and messengers moved between different regions, bringing news, goods, and ideas. These travelers connected distant communities. They helped spread new products, technologies, and cultural influences. One of the most important parts of medieval society was the relationship between people and work. Work was not separated into strict hours like modern jobs. Life and labor were connected. People worked when there was something to do. During harvest season, everyone who could help often worked long days because the success of the harvest affected the entire year. Rest was important, but survival came first. The role of women in medieval society was complex. Women's lives were often limited by social rules, but they played essential roles. They managed households, cared for children, helped with farming, produced clothing, prepared food, and sometimes worked in trades. Women in villages were important contributors to the survival of their families. In towns, some women worked as merchants, artisans, and business owners. Their experiences depended greatly on their social class and location. Poor women and wealthy women lived very different lives. A noble woman might have responsibilities connected to managing an estate and family alliances. A peasant woman might spend most of her days working physically demanding tasks. But both were part of the structure that kept society functioning. Marriage and family were not only personal matters, They were connected to economics, property, and survival. A household needed many hands to complete daily tasks. Children were not only family members, they were also future workers who would help maintain the household. Food preparation was another major part of daily life. Without modern appliances, preparing meals required time and effort. Grinding grain, collecting fuel, cooking, and storing food were constant responsibilities. Preserving food was especially important. People needed ways to keep supplies available during winter or difficult periods. They used methods like drying, salting, and other traditional techniques. A successful food supply could mean the difference between survival and hunger. Medieval people also had a different relationship with time. Today, people often think in minutes and seconds. Medieval people were more connected to natural cycles. Daylight, seasons, religious events, and agricultural schedules shaped their understanding of time. The changing seasons controlled their lives. Winter was a period of preparation and survival. Spring brought new hope. Summer meant intense work. Autumn was the reward and challenge of harvesting. Nature was not just the environment around them. It was the force that controlled their existence. Entertainment also existed in many forms. People gathered for celebrations, competitions, music, storytelling, and games. Children created their own simple games. Adults enjoyed gatherings where they could escape daily struggles. Laughter and joy were not limited to wealthy people. Even those living difficult lives found moments of happiness. The medieval world was full of contradictions. It was a time of great inequality, but also strong community. It was a time of limited knowledge, but also remarkable creativity. It was a time of hardship, but also human connection. The people of the Middle Ages were not just characters from old stories. They were real humans with emotions, dreams, and struggles. They loved their families. They worried about the future. They hoped for better days. And they faced challenges that required incredible strength. The hidden reality of medieval people shows us something important. History is not only the story of kings, battles, and empires. It is also the story of ordinary people who lived ordinary lives in extraordinary circumstances. Their names may have disappeared, but their existence shaped the world we know today. The medieval world was a place where every person had a role to play. Society depended on countless people performing everyday tasks that were often unnoticed. A village could not survive without farmers producing food, craftsmen creating tools, builders constructing homes, and workers maintaining the community. The strength of medieval society came from these ordinary people, but their lives were also controlled by many rules. Social position, traditions, and local customs influenced almost every part of their existence. A person's status could determine what kind of work they did, what they could own, and what opportunities they had. For many ordinary people, changing their social position was extremely difficult. However, medieval society was not completely frozen. Some people managed to improve their lives through skill, trade, marriage, or opportunities in growing towns. Cities especially became places where change was possible. As trade expanded, Merchants gained more influence. Markets became larger, and some towns developed into important centers of business. A skilled craftsman could sometimes earn respect and wealth. The rise of towns created a new group of people who were neither traditional peasants nor nobles. They became merchants, shopkeepers, and professionals. Their lives were different from both the countryside and the castle. Inside medieval towns, streets were usually narrow and crowded. Buildings were close together because space was limited. People lived, worked, and traded in the same areas. A craftsman's workshop was often connected to their home. The sound of tools, animals, and people filled the streets. The smell of food, smoke, and materials from different trades mixed together. For modern people, medieval towns might seem uncomfortable, but for those living there, they were centers of opportunity. Trade connected different regions. Goods traveled long distances. Spices, fabrics, metals, and other valuable items moved from one place to another. These exchanges introduced people to new ideas and cultures. But medieval trade was not easy. Merchants faced dangerous roads, unpredictable weather, and conflicts. A successful journey could bring great profit, but failure could mean losing everything. Money also played an important role. Many people still depended on exchanging goods and services, but coins became increasingly important in trade. The growth of markets slowly changed the way people interacted economically. Another major part of medieval life was law and justice. Without modern police forces or legal systems, communities had their own ways of maintaining order. Local authorities, rulers, and religious institutions all influenced justice. Punishments could be strict. Society believed that maintaining order was necessary for survival. Fear of punishment was often used to control behavior. But justice was not always equal. A person's social status could influence how they were treated. The powerful often had advantages that ordinary people did not. This inequality was one of the defining features of medieval society. Despite these challenges, medieval people created strong traditions. Festivals, songs, stories, and customs connected generations together. Many traditions that began centuries ago influenced cultures that still exist today. Language also developed through everyday people. The way ordinary people spoke, told stories, and communicated shaped the evolution of different languages. History is often written by rulers and educated people, but everyday speech belonged to everyone. Another important part of medieval life was craftsmanship. Before factories and machines, nearly everything was made by hand. A pair of shoes, a piece of clothing, a tool, or a piece of furniture required skill and time. Objects were built to last because replacing them was difficult. A craftsman's reputation depended on the quality of their work. A mistake could damage their name, while excellent work could make them respected. Young people often learned trades through apprenticeships. They worked under experienced masters and slowly developed their abilities. This process could take years. Knowledge passed from one generation to another. The medieval world may appear distant, but many human experiences were exactly the same as today. People wanted security. They wanted respect. They wanted their families to survive. They wanted moments of happiness. Their technology was different. Their environment was different. But their emotions were familiar. The hidden reality of medieval people is not a story of strangers from a forgotten age. It is the story of humans facing challenges, creating communities, and trying to build a meaningful life. The further we look into medieval life, the more we discover that ordinary people were not simply living in a world of darkness and struggle. They were part of a constantly changing society where ideas, traditions, and human creativity continued to grow. One of the most important parts of medieval life was the relationship between people and knowledge. Today, knowledge is easily available through books, schools, and technology. But in medieval times, information traveled slowly. A person's knowledge often came from family, community, experience, and observation. A farmer learned from previous generations. A healer learned from traditional practices. A builder learned from years of working with others. Their knowledge was practical and connected to survival. They understood the materials around them. They knew which plants could be useful. They understood animals and the land. Their world was different, but their curiosity was very real. Children were introduced to responsibility at a young age. A child's life was often connected to the needs of the family. They learned by watching adults and helping with daily tasks. A child growing up in a farming family learned about crops and animals. A child in a craftsman's family learned the skills of the trade. A child in a wealthy household learned different responsibilities connected to their social position. Education was shaped by the world they were born into. But children were still children. They laughed, played, created games, and formed friendships. Their childhood may have been shorter than today, but it was not without joy. The medieval home was also a place where generations shared their experiences. Grandparents, parents, and children often lived close together. Stories were passed from older people to younger people. These stories carried lessons about life, history, morality, and identity. Before modern entertainment, storytelling was one of the strongest ways people connected. A good storyteller could capture the attention of an entire group. Legends about heroes, battles, mysteries, and adventures traveled across regions. Some stories changed over time as they were retold, but they reflected the hopes and fears of the people who created them. Death was also a more visible part of medieval life. People experienced loss more frequently. Because medicine was limited and dangers were common, families often faced the death of loved ones at younger ages. This created a society where people had a closer relationship with mortality. Religion and traditions helped people understand loss and continue living. Community support was extremely important during difficult moments. People depended on neighbors and relatives. In a world without modern emergency services, human connection was often the greatest protection. Work was not the only thing that defined medieval people. They also cared about appearance, reputation, and social relationships. people wanted to be respected in their communities. A person's reputation could influence their opportunities and relationships. Trust was valuable. A reliable worker or honest trader could build a better life. Medieval society also had different ideas about beauty and fashion. Clothing styles changed over time. The wealthy displayed their status through expensive materials and decorations. Ordinary people also cared about how they looked, even if their choices were limited by their resources. People have always wanted to express themselves. Even in difficult times, identity mattered. The relationship between humans and animals was another important part of medieval life. Animals were not only sources of food, they were workers, companions, and valuable members of daily survival. Horses helped with travel and warfare. Oxen helped with farming. Dogs protected homes. Other animals provided materials and resources. Life was deeply connected to the natural world. Medieval people also had their own understanding of the environment. They noticed changes in seasons, animal behavior, and natural patterns. Their survival depended on paying attention to the world around them. A person who ignored nature's signs could face serious consequences. The hidden reality of medieval people shows us that they were not simply trapped in the past. They were adapting, learning, creating, and building lives with the tools they had. Their world was challenging, but it was also filled with human experiences that remain familiar. They searched for meaning. They cared for their families. They dreamed of better days. And they left behind a legacy that continues to influence the world today. The medieval world was built on relationships. A person rarely survived alone. Family, neighbors, communities, and local traditions created a network that supported people through the difficulties of everyday life. For ordinary medieval people, cooperation was not just a social choice. It was often necessary for survival. When a house needed to be built, when crops needed to be harvested, or when a family faced a crisis, people depended on one another. Community strength was one of the greatest advantages medieval people had. But living so closely with others also meant that everyone's actions affected the group. A person's reputation mattered. Being known as trustworthy, hardworking, or fair could help someone in difficult situations. On the other hand, losing the trust of the community could create serious problems. In small villages, everyone knew each other's lives. There was little privacy compared to modern society. People knew who was struggling, who was successful, and who needed help. This close connection created both support and pressure. One of the most important parts of medieval society was agriculture. Farming was the foundation of almost everything. Without successful crops, there was no stable food supply. The entire social structure depended on the work of farmers. But farming was unpredictable. A farmer could work for months and still lose everything because of weather, pests, or disease. This uncertainty shaped the mindset of medieval people. They understood that life could change suddenly. A good year could bring security. A bad year could bring suffering. Because food was so important, every part of the agricultural process mattered. Preparing the land, planting seeds, caring for crops, and harvesting require patience and knowledge. Even small improvements in farming techniques could make a huge difference. Over time, medieval farmers developed better methods. They improved tools, learned from experience, and adapted to local conditions. Their work was one of the reasons populations were able to grow. The medieval diet also depended heavily on location. People living near rivers or the sea had access to different foods than those living inland. Local environment influenced what people ate. Some communities depended more on grains. Others relied on fishing, livestock, or wild resources. Food was not only about survival, it was also connected to culture. Different regions developed their own traditions around cooking and sharing meals. Meals brought families together. Even simple food could become a moment of connection. The way people celebrated was also connected to their environment and beliefs. Festivals marked important moments of the year. They created breaks from hard labor and gave people something to look forward to. During celebrations, communities came together. There was music, food, conversation, and shared experiences. These moments were especially valuable because daily life could be demanding. Medieval people also had a strong connection to religion and spirituality. Their beliefs influenced how they understood the world. Events like storms, illnesses, births, and deaths were often interpreted through spiritual ideas. Faith provided explanations for things people could not understand. It also gave many people comfort during uncertain times. Religious institutions were among the most organized parts of medieval society. They influenced education, charity, politics, and daily routines. Many important writings survived because people carefully copied and preserved them. Without these efforts, much of the knowledge from the past might have disappeared. However, medieval society also had many inequalities. Power was not shared equally. Some people had wealth, land, and influence, while others had very limited choices. A person's birth could shape their entire life. This inequality affected opportunities, rights, and responsibilities. The difference between the powerful and the powerless was one of the strongest realities of the medieval world. Yet even ordinary people found ways to influence their communities. Through skills, traditions, cooperation, and persistence, they shaped the world around them. They built homes, they raised families, they created tools, they preserved stories, they continued living despite uncertainty. The hidden reality of medieval people is not just about what they lacked, it is also about what they achieved. Without modern technology, they still created societies, solved problems, and built foundations that later generations would inherit. Their lives remind us that history is not only made by famous leaders. It is made every day by ordinary people. The medieval world was a place where survival required constant adaptation. People lived with challenges that modern generations rarely experience, but they also developed incredible skills to overcome those challenges. One of the biggest realities of medieval life was uncertainty. People could not predict many things that would happen in their lives. A sudden illness, a failed harvest, a harsh winter, or a conflict could completely change a family's future. Because of this, medieval people learned to value preparation. They stored food when possible. They repaired tools instead of replacing them. They reused materials. Nothing was easily wasted. In a world where resources were limited, every object had importance. A broken piece of clothing could be repaired. Old materials could be transformed into something useful. People developed a practical mindset because their survival depended on it. The medieval home was not just a place to sleep. It was a workplace, a storage area, a meeting place, and the center of family life. Many people spent most of their lives within their homes and communities. The separation between work and personal life was much smaller than today. A person's profession often became part of their identity. A blacksmith was known for their skill. A farmer was known for their land and crops. A merchant was known for their ability to trade. People were remembered by what they contributed. Craftsmanship was highly respected because handmade objects required patience and expertise. A skilled worker could spend years mastering a single profession. Apprentices learned by observing and practicing. They started with simple tasks and slowly gained responsibility. This system allowed knowledge to survive across generations. Every tool, building, and piece of clothing carried the effort of human hands. Another important part of medieval society was communication. Without phones, newspapers, or the internet, information moved differently. Travelers, merchants, religious figures, and messengers carried news between places. Rumors and stories could travel from village to village. Sometimes information changed as it spread, but communication still connected people across large distances. The spread of ideas played an important role in changing medieval society. New inventions and techniques slowly traveled from one region to another. People learned from different cultures through trade and contact. The medieval world was not isolated. It was connected in ways that are sometimes overlooked. The role of cities continued to grow. As towns expanded, they became centers of culture and economic activity. More people gathered in urban areas looking for opportunities. City life offered possibilities that were not always available in the countryside. But it also created new problems. Crowded streets, limited space, and sanitation challenges made urban life difficult. Still, cities represented change. They were places where new ideas appeared. They were places where different kinds of people met. The medieval market was more than a place to buy and sell. It was a social space. People exchanged goods, stories, opinions, and information. A market day could become one of the most important events in a community. People came not only because they needed something, but because it was a chance to connect. Entertainment was also part of medieval life. People enjoyed games, competitions, music, and performances. Storytellers played an important role because stories provided escape from daily struggles. A powerful story could make people imagine worlds beyond their own. Humor was also important. Even during difficult periods, people found reasons to laugh. This shows something universal about humanity. No matter how challenging life becomes, people continue searching for moments of happiness. Medieval people also had strong connections to traditions. The knowledge of ancestors shaped everyday decisions. Old customs influenced celebrations, marriages, work, and community life. Traditions created a sense of belonging. They reminded people that they were part of something larger than themselves. But traditions could also limit change. Some ideas remained because people feared abandoning familiar ways. The medieval world was a balance between preserving the past and adapting to the future. The reality of medieval people was complicated. They were not simply helpless victims of history. They were active participants in their own lives. They made choices. They created solutions. They built communities. They faced uncertainty with courage. Their story is not only about castles and battles. It is about millions of ordinary people whose daily actions shaped civilization. The lives of medieval people reveal a powerful truth about history. The greatest stories are not always written about the most powerful individuals. Many of the people who shaped the world left behind no famous names, no statues, and no grand monuments. Yet their daily actions created the foundation of society. Every field that was planted, every house that was built, every tool that was created, and every child who was raised became part of a much larger story. For ordinary medieval people, family was one of the strongest sources of security. The family was not only a place of love and connection, it was also an economic unit. Everyone who could contribute had a role. Parents, children, and relatives often worked together to keep the household functioning. The survival of one person was connected to the survival of everyone around them. Relationships were shaped by necessity, but that does not mean they lacked emotion. People experienced love, friendship, loyalty, and grief just as humans do today. They celebrated births, they mourned losses, they created memories. The emotions of medieval people were not different, simply because their world was different. One of the most difficult parts of life was dealing with danger. The medieval world contained many threats. Accidents, infections, conflicts, and hunger were common concerns. People had to live with the knowledge that life could change quickly. This created a strong appreciation for stability and community. A safe home, enough food, and healthy family members were considered great blessings. The concept of wealth was also different. Today, many people measure wealth through money and possessions. In medieval times, wealth could mean land, animals, tools, or the ability to produce resources. A farmer with healthy animals and productive land could be considered successful. A craftsman with valuable skills could have a respected position. Skills themselves were a form of wealth. Knowledge was another valuable resource. People who understood farming, medicine, construction, or trade had abilities that others depended on. Experience was passed down from one generation to another. Older members of society were often important because they carried knowledge from the past. Age brought respect because it represented survival and wisdom. The medieval environment also shaped people's personalities. Living close to nature meant people paid attention to changes around them. They noticed animal behavior, weather patterns, and seasonal signs. Their survival depended on understanding the natural world. A farmer who recognized the signs of changing weather had an advantage. A traveler who understood the landscape had a better chance of reaching their destination. The relationship between humans and nature was direct. There were no large systems protecting people from environmental problems. Nature could provide life, but it could also create danger. Medieval people also developed strong beliefs about luck, fate, and destiny. When events happened that they could not explain, they searched for meaning. Their beliefs helped them understand a world filled with uncertainty. These ideas influenced decisions, traditions, and daily behavior. The medieval mind was shaped by the information and experiences available at the time. Their explanations were sometimes different from modern understanding, but they were attempts to make sense of life. The world of medieval people was also a world of creativity. They created beautiful artwork, music, architecture, and literature. Many achievements from the Middle Ages still influence the world today. Builders created structures that required incredible skill. Artists produced works that reflected their beliefs and imagination. Writers recorded stories and ideas that survived for centuries. Human creativity continued even during difficult periods. This is one of the most important lessons from the medieval era. Hard conditions did not stop people from creating. They still searched for beauty. They still told stories. They still expressed themselves. The hidden reality of medieval people is not only about suffering. It is about human strength. It is about people who lived without many modern advantages, but still built families, communities, and cultures. They were ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. And their lives remind us that every generation has its own struggles. But humanity continues through adaptation, connection, and hope. When we look deeper into medieval history, we begin to understand that the past was not simply a world of kings and warriors. Behind every castle wall, every battlefield, and every political decision were ordinary people whose lives continued day after day. They were the farmers who produced food. They were the workers who built roads and homes. They were the craftsmen who created essential objects. They were the families who kept communities alive. The survival of medieval society depended on people whose names were often never recorded. One of the most important aspects of medieval life was the connection between humans and labor. Work was not only a responsibility, it was a way of life. A person's daily routine was connected to the needs of the season and the needs of the community. During busy periods, people worked from sunrise until sunset. During quieter times, they repaired tools, prepared supplies, and planned for the future. The rhythm of life followed nature rather than artificial schedules. The changing seasons controlled almost everything. Winter was a period of difficulty, but also preparation. People stayed indoors more often, protected their resources, and waited for the return of warmer weather. Spring brought activity and new beginnings. Summer demanded energy and effort. Autumn was a critical time because the success of the harvest could determine whether families would survive the coming months. The natural world was like a calendar. People understood time through changes around them. Another important reality of medieval life was the importance of reputation. In small communities, a person's actions were remembered. Being honest, skilled, and dependable could create opportunities. A person who helped others during difficult times could gain respect. Social connections mattered because people depended on each other. Unlike modern societies where people can often live anonymously, medieval communities were closely connected. Everyone had a place in the community. Everyone was seen. This created support, but it also meant people had less personal freedom. Medieval people also had different relationships with possessions. Today, many objects can be replaced easily. In the Middle Ages, objects were valuable because they required time and effort to create. A tool could last for years. Clothing was repaired many times. Household items were carefully maintained. People understood the value of resources. Waste was not only inconvenient, it could be dangerous. The home was also a place of constant activity. Cooking, repairing, crafting, storing supplies, and family life all happened in the same environment. People did not have many separate spaces for different activities. A home had to serve many purposes. For poorer families, living conditions were often simple. But simplicity did not mean people lacked emotional connections. A small home could still contain memories, traditions, and family bonds. The relationship between different social classes was one of the strongest features of medieval society. The wealthy had access to comfort and power. The poor carried most of the physical work. This difference shaped almost every part of life. However, even among different classes, people shared certain experiences. Everyone faced illness. Everyone experienced loss. Everyone searched for meaning. Everyone wanted a secure future. The medieval world also had moments of transformation. New ideas appeared, cities expanded, trade increased, knowledge traveled. Society slowly changed. The Middle Ages were not a single unchanging period. They lasted for centuries, and during that time, enormous changes took place. The people living at the beginning of the medieval era experienced a very different world from those living near its end. Technology improved. Political systems changed. Cultures developed. Human civilization continued moving forward. The hidden reality of medieval people teaches us that history is not only about dramatic events, it is also about the quiet moments that happen every day. A farmer planting seeds, a mother preparing food, a craftsman shaping a tool, a child learning from an elder. These small actions may seem ordinary, but together they created the world. The medieval people were not simply characters from the past. They were human beings trying to build a life in the circumstances they were given. They struggled. They adapted. They loved. They survived. And their story continues to remind us how powerful, ordinary, human effort can be. The deeper we explore medieval life, the clearer it becomes that ordinary people were the foundation of every kingdom and civilization. The rulers of history may have made decisions, but it was the common people who carried those decisions into reality. A kingdom could not exist without farmers growing food, builders creating structures, workers producing goods, and families raising the next generation. The medieval world depended on countless invisible efforts. One of the greatest challenges medieval people faced was the struggle for security. Modern people often rely on systems that provide protection, transportation, healthcare, and communication. Medieval people had very few of these advantages. If something went wrong, individuals and communities had to respond with the resources they had. A damaged house needed to be repaired by hand. A lost harvest needed to be replaced through cooperation. A sick family member needed care from relatives and local knowledge. Survival was a shared responsibility. This created a strong sense of community. Neighbors were not just people living nearby. They were often the people who helped each other through the hardest moments. The village or town was built on relationships. People worked together because they understood that anyone could need help someday. However, medieval communities also had conflicts. Human nature did not change. People argued over property, money, responsibilities, and personal disagreements. The past was not a perfect world of harmony. It was a world of real people with different personalities and interests. The way people solve conflicts was different from today. Local customs, leaders, and traditions played important roles. Some decisions were based on community expectations. Others were controlled by powerful authorities. The results were not always fair, but they reflected the values and structures of the time. Another fascinating part of medieval life was the importance of craftsmanship. Before mass production, every item required individual effort. A simple object could represent hours or days of work. A wooden table, a metal tool, or a piece of clothing was not just an object. It was the result of human skill. Craftsmen took pride in their work because their reputation depended on quality. A well-made product could make someone respected throughout the community. Many skills were passed from parents to children or from masters to apprentices. This created a chain of knowledge that connected generations. Without written instructions or modern training systems, people learned through observation and practice. The medieval world also had a deep connection to animals. Animals were essential partners in daily life. Horses allowed people to travel and transport goods. Oxen helped farmers work the land. Sheep provided wool. Cows provided milk. Animals were part of the economy and daily survival. People understood the importance of caring for animals because their lives depended on them. Food production was one of the most important concerns. A family's survival depended on planning. People needed to know how much food to store, how to protect supplies, and how to prepare for difficult periods. A successful year required patience and careful decisions. A single mistake could have serious consequences. This constant awareness of survival shaped medieval thinking. People understood that life was fragile. But this awareness also made them appreciate simple things: a good meal, a safe home, a successful harvest, a healthy family. These were moments of happiness. The medieval idea of happiness was not necessarily based on luxury. For many people, happiness came from stability and connection. They found joy in gatherings, traditions, music, and shared experiences. Their lives were challenging, but they were not empty. Another important part of medieval society was storytelling. Stories preserved memories. They explained values. They entertained people. Before modern forms of media, storytelling connected communities. A story told by an elder could survive for generations. Through stories, people remembered their past and imagined different futures. The hidden reality of medieval people shows us that the Middle Ages were not just an era of darkness. They were an era of human experience. People faced problems, but they also created solutions. They lived difficult lives, but they also found meaning. They lacked many modern comforts, but they possessed something timeless, the ability to adapt and continue. The story of medieval people is also the story of change. Although the Middle Ages are often remembered as a fixed and unchanging period, the reality was that society was constantly moving forward. New ideas appeared. Old traditions transformed. Communities grew. Human beings continued searching for better ways to live. One of the biggest changes in medieval society was the growth of towns and cities. At the beginning of the medieval period, many people lived in rural communities. But over time, trade expanded, populations increased, and towns became more important. Cities became places where different kinds of people met. Merchants arrived with goods. Craftsmen brought their skills. Travelers brought stories from distant places. A city could become a center of opportunity. However, city life was not easy. Crowded streets, limited space, and difficult living conditions created many challenges. People lived close together, and problems could spread quickly. But cities also represented a new way of life. They allowed people to specialize in different professions. A person did not always have to depend only on farming. They could become a trader, artisan, builder, or worker in another field. This created new possibilities. Trade was one of the forces that connected medieval societies. Goods traveled across regions, sometimes across enormous distances. People exchanged not only products but also ideas. A traveler could bring news from another kingdom. A merchant could introduce new materials or techniques. The medieval world was more connected than many people imagine. The movement of people and goods slowly changed cultures. Food, clothing styles, tools, and traditions were influenced by contact with different regions. This exchange shaped the development of societies. Another important part of medieval life was religion and belief. For many people, faith was not separate from daily life. It influenced how they understood the world, their responsibilities, and their future. Religious events often marked the calendar. Festivals, ceremonies, and traditions brought communities together. Belief also provided comfort during difficult times. When people faced uncertainty, they searched for hope and meaning. Religious institutions also played practical roles. They helped the poor, cared for travelers, preserved knowledge, and supported education. Many writings survived because people dedicated time to copying and protecting them. Without these efforts, much of the knowledge from the past might have disappeared. Education was limited compared to today, but learning still existed. People learned through experience, they learned through observation, they learned through work. A farmer understood agriculture because of years of practice. A builder understood construction because of years of experience. A healer understood remedies because knowledge had been passed down. Not all knowledge was written. Much of it lived in human memory. Medieval people also had a strong relationship with traditions. Customs connected people to their ancestors. They created a sense of identity. A person was not only an individual, they were part of a family, village, culture, and history. These connections gave people a feeling of belonging. But traditions could also create limits. Some rules were difficult to change. Some people had fewer opportunities because of the society they were born into. The medieval world contained both strength and inequality. It was a place of cooperation and division, progress and limitation, creativity and struggle. This complexity is what makes medieval history so fascinating. Ordinary people were constantly making decisions within the world they inherited. They could not control everything around them, but they could choose how to respond. They built relationships. They created communities. They protected traditions. They adapted to challenges. The hidden reality of medieval people is not just about how they lived. It is about why their lives still matter. Because behind every historical event were real humans experiencing real emotions. They felt fear. They felt happiness. They experienced love. They faced loss. They hoped for tomorrow. And through their everyday actions, they became part of history. When we study medieval people, one of the most important things to remember is that history is not only created in palaces and battlefields. History is also created in small homes, crowded streets, farms, workshops, and ordinary conversations. The daily choices of ordinary people shaped the future just as much as the decisions of rulers. A medieval person's life was often a balance between tradition and necessity. They followed customs that had existed for generations, but they also had to adjust to new situations. A farmer had to respond to changing weather. A merchant had to respond to changing markets. A family had to respond to unexpected problems. Adaptation was a necessary skill. The medieval world required patience. Many things that people wanted could not happen quickly. Travel took time, messages took time. Building projects took years. Learning a skill took years. People lived with a slower rhythm than modern society. This slower pace shaped their understanding of life. A person could spend decades perfecting one craft. A building might take generations to complete. A tradition might survive for hundreds of years. Time was experienced differently. One of the most important aspects of medieval communities was cooperation during difficult periods. When disasters happened, people often had to rely on each other. A poor harvest, a fire, or an illness could affect an entire village. Communities developed ways to support those who needed help. Sharing resources and helping neighbors were essential parts of survival. However, medieval life also contained fear. People lived with many unknown dangers. A simple journey could be risky. A small injury could become serious. A harsh winter could create suffering. These realities influenced the way people viewed the world. They understood that life was uncertain. This made moments of safety and happiness especially valuable. A successful harvest was not just an economic achievement, it was a reason to celebrate. A healthy family was not something taken for granted. It was something deeply appreciated. The medieval relationship with work was also different. Work was connected to identity. People were often known by their profession. A person's skills could define their place in society. A talented craftsman could earn respect. A hardworking farmer could become an important member of the community. Knowledge and ability created value. The creation of everyday objects required great skill. A piece of clothing, a weapon, a tool, or a building was the result of careful effort. People understood the value of things because they knew how difficult they were to produce. This created a culture of repair and reuse. Objects were maintained because they mattered. The medieval world also had its own forms of beauty. People decorated homes, created art, designed clothing, and produced music. Even in difficult conditions, humans continued expressing creativity. This reveals something important about humanity. People do not only seek survival, they also seek meaning and beauty. They want to create something that represents who they are. Music and storytelling were especially important. A song could carry memories. A story could preserve history. A poem could express emotions. These forms of creativity connected people across generations. Many medieval stories survived because people continued telling them. The role of women and men in medieval society was shaped by social expectations, but both contributed greatly to keeping communities alive. People worked in different ways depending on their circumstances. Their responsibilities were influenced by class, location, and family needs. The lives of ordinary people cannot be understood through a single experience. There was no single medieval life. A wealthy person, a farmer, a merchant, and a craftsman could experience completely different realities. The Middle Ages were not one simple story. They were millions of individual stories happening at the same time. The hidden reality of medieval people teaches us that the past was filled with complexity. They were not simply victims of their world. They were creators within it. They built, repaired, protected, and continued. Their struggles became their strength. Their daily lives became the foundation of history. The lives of medieval people were shaped by countless small decisions made every day. These decisions may have seemed ordinary at the time, but together they created the foundations of entire societies. A person deciding when to plant crops, how to protect food, how to build a home, or how to teach a child was participating in the continuation of human civilization. The medieval world was not built overnight. It was built slowly through generations of effort. One of the most important parts of medieval life was the relationship between people and their surroundings. The environment influenced everything. The location of a village, the availability of water, the quality of the land, and the climate all affected how people lived. Communities developed differently, depending on where they existed. People near forests used different resources than people near rivers. People living in colder regions had different challenges than those in warmer areas. Nature shaped culture. Food traditions, building styles, and daily routines all developed from local conditions. Medieval people understood their environment because their survival depended on it. They knew where resources could be found. They knew when animals migrated. They knew when seasons were changing. This knowledge was built through generations of observation. The relationship between humans and nature was much more direct than it is for many people today. Another major part of medieval life was the importance of skill. A person's abilities could determine their future. A skilled worker had something valuable to offer. Craftsmanship was respected because it required dedication and experience. A master craftsman was not simply someone who made objects. They were someone who carried knowledge that might have taken decades to develop. The process of learning a skill was slow. Young apprentices watched, practiced, failed, and improved. There were no shortcuts. Every generation depended on the previous generation to preserve knowledge. This created a continuous connection between the past and the future. The medieval economy was also based on human effort. Without machines, production depended on time and labor. This meant that every product had a human story behind it. A simple item could represent the work of many people: the farmer who produced materials, the craftsman who shaped them, the merchant who transported them, the customer who used them. Every object connected different lives. Medieval people also had a strong sense of community identity. A person was often identified by their family, village, profession, or region. These connections created belonging. People knew where they came from. They knew the traditions of their ancestors. They understood their place within the larger community. However, these connections could also create limitations. A person's background could restrict their opportunities. The society they were born into often influenced their entire future. This was one of the realities of medieval life. The difference between social classes was very visible. The wealthy had access to comfort, education, and influence. The poor performed much of the physical labor. Yet both groups shared something fundamental. They were human. They experienced happiness and sadness. They had hopes and fears. They formed relationships and created memories. The emotional world of medieval people was not very different from ours. A parent worried about their child. A friend cared about another friend. A family celebrated good news. A community mourned loss. These experiences connected people across centuries. The medieval world also shows the importance of resilience. People faced problems without many of the tools available today, but they continued. They rebuilt after disasters. They adapted after failures. They found solutions with limited resources. Their ability to continue was one of their greatest strengths. The hidden reality of medieval people is not only a story of what they lacked, it is a story of what they achieved despite those limitations. They created communities. They preserved knowledge. They developed traditions. They built the foundations of the modern world. Their lives may seem distant, but their struggles and emotions remain familiar. Because at the center of history is always the same thing. Human beings trying to survive, connect, and create a meaningful life. The story of medieval people is ultimately a story about human endurance. It is the story of millions of individuals who lived through uncertain times and still found ways to build families, communities, and cultures. When we look at the Middle Ages from a distance, we often focus on rulers, wars, and great events. But the true foundation of this era was created by ordinary people. They were the ones who planted the fields. They were the ones who built the roads. They were the ones who created the tools. They were the ones who raised future generations. Without them, no kingdom could survive. The medieval world demanded patience. People had to accept that many things could not be changed quickly. A journey took days, a message took weeks, a building took years, a skill took a lifetime to master. This slower pace created a different relationship with time. People often valued long-term effort more than immediate results. A person might spend their entire life improving a craft. A family might maintain a tradition for generations. A community might protect knowledge that had existed for centuries. This connection between generations was one of the strongest parts of medieval society. Older people were important because they carried experience. They remembered past events. They understood traditions. They taught younger generations how to survive. Knowledge was a treasure. It was something that had to be protected and passed forward. The medieval home was one of the main places where this knowledge survived. Parents taught children. Grandparents shared stories. Skills moved from one generation to another. The family was a school of life. People learned not only how to work, but also how to behave, cooperate, and understand their place in the world. Even though medieval society had many limitations, it also had creativity. People created beautiful buildings, music, art, and stories. They decorated everyday objects. They created traditions that brought meaning to ordinary life. Human creativity did not disappear because life was difficult. In many ways, difficulty encouraged creativity. People used what they had. They transformed simple materials into useful and meaningful things. This ability to create with limited resources was one of the remarkable qualities of medieval people. The medieval world also teaches us about the importance of community. Today, many people can live independently, but medieval people often depended heavily on cooperation. A person's survival was connected to the people around them. Helping others was not only kindness, it was necessary. Communities worked because people understood their responsibilities toward one another. Of course, medieval life was not perfect. There was inequality, there was conflict, there was suffering. Many people had limited choices because of the society they were born into. But their lives cannot be reduced to hardship alone. They laughed, they celebrated, they loved, they dreamed. They experienced the full range of human emotions. The hidden reality of medieval people shows us that every generation has its own challenges. The tools change. The environment changes. The problems change. But the human desire for safety, connection, and purpose remains the same. The people of the Middle Ages were not simply figures from an ancient world. They were parents, workers, artists, builders, and dreamers. They were humans trying to create a meaningful life, and their story continues to remind us that history is not only made by famous names, it is made by everyone. Every person who works, every person who cares, every person who continues despite difficulties. That is the true hidden reality of medieval people. The journey through the hidden reality of medieval people reveals a world that was far more complex than the simple images we often see. The Middle Ages were not only castles, battles, and powerful rulers. They were also small villages, crowded markets, family homes, workshops, and countless ordinary moments that shaped human history. The people of this era lived without many of the comforts that exist today. They had no modern medicine, no advanced technology, and no instant communication. Yet they created societies that survived for centuries. They adapted to their environment, they learned from experience, they protected their families, they passed knowledge from one generation to another. Their achievements were not always recorded, but their influence remained. A farmer who planted crops was contributing to the survival of a community. A craftsman who created tools was helping others work. A parent who taught a child was continuing the future of society. These simple actions carried enormous importance. The medieval world also reminds us that history belongs to everyone. The names of kings and rulers may appear in books, but the lives of ordinary people were the foundation beneath those stories. The people who worked quietly behind the scenes were the ones who kept civilization moving. Their lives were filled with challenges. They faced hunger, illness, uncertainty, and difficult work. But they also experienced happiness. They enjoyed celebrations. They created friendships. They shared stories. They found meaning in their daily lives. This is what makes their history so powerful. They were not simply surviving, they were living. They had dreams for their children. They hoped for better harvests. They wanted peaceful communities. They wanted their families to remain safe. Their hopes were not so different from the hopes people have today. The medieval era also teaches us about human creativity. Even in difficult conditions, people continued to build, create, and imagine. They produced art, they developed skills, they created traditions, they left behind ideas that influenced future generations. Their world was different from ours, but their humanity was the same. They felt joy, they felt fear, they experienced love and loss. They searched for purpose. The hidden reality of medieval people is not a story about a forgotten group from the past. It is a story about human beings, people who faced the world they were given and tried to make the best of it. Their lives show that progress is not only created by inventions or powerful leaders. Progress is also created through patience, cooperation, and everyday effort. Every generation stands on the work of those who came before. The modern world exists partly because countless unnamed people continued building, learning, and surviving. The medieval people may have lived hundreds of years ago, but their story still connects with us. Because behind all of history, there is one constant: human beings searching for a better life. The hidden reality of medieval people is the hidden reality of humanity itself. A story of struggle, a story of strength, a story of survival, and above all, a story of people. Although we have reached the end of many familiar stories about the medieval world, there are still deeper layers of ordinary life that reveal how people truly experienced their time. The medieval era was not just a period between ancient and modern history. It was a world where people created their own systems, developed their own ideas, and found their own ways to face the challenges around them. One of the most interesting realities of medieval life was how people understood success. Today, success is often connected with wealth, career, or personal achievements. For many medieval people, success meant something more basic. A successful year could mean having enough food for winter. It could mean keeping a family healthy. It could mean protecting a home. It could mean earning the respect of neighbors. Their goals were shaped by the world they lived in. Survival and stability were achievements. Everyday life required constant attention. A family had to think ahead, and they had to prepare supplies. They had to repair what was damaged. They had to make decisions carefully. Because resources were limited, there was little room for waste. A single tool, animal, or piece of clothing could have great value. People developed a strong sense of responsibility toward their possessions. They understood that everything required effort. The medieval relationship with nature also influenced their beliefs and traditions. The changing seasons affected work and celebrations and daily routines. People watched the skies, the land, and animals because nature provided important signs. They understood that human life was connected to the environment. The success of a community depended on maintaining balance with the world around it. Agriculture remained the heart of medieval society. The farmer's work was often physically demanding and unpredictable, but it was also one of the most important contributions a person could make. Without food production, no city, army, or kingdom could continue. The simple act of growing crops supported entire civilizations. This is why ordinary workers deserve a central place in history. Their work may have been quiet, but its impact was enormous. Another hidden part of medieval life was the importance of emotions and relationships. Historical records often focus on laws, wars, and politics. But behind those events were people experiencing personal moments. A family waiting for someone to return home. Friends sharing stories after a long day. A community celebrating a special occasion. These small moments created the human side of history. Medieval people were not only workers, they were individuals with personalities, hopes, and fears. Some were ambitious, some were creative, some were curious, some wanted a peaceful life, just like people today. They had different dreams. The medieval world also shows how knowledge grows over time. Many ideas that existed during the Middle Ages were later improved or changed. Human understanding is always developing. Each generation adds something new. The medieval people were part of that long process. They preserved information, they experimented, they learned from mistakes, they passed their experiences forward. Their contributions became part of the foundation for future societies. The hidden reality of medieval people is therefore not only about what life was like hundreds of years ago. It is about understanding how human beings continue moving forward. Every generation faces difficulties. Every generation searches for solutions. Every generation leaves something behind. The medieval people left behind more than buildings and objects. They left behind lessons about endurance, cooperation, and the importance of ordinary lives. Because history is not only created by those who hold power, history is created by everyone who lives, works, and contributes. The deeper we examine medieval society, the more we realize that the people of this era were not living in a simple world. Their lives were filled with complicated choices, difficult situations, and constant adaptation. Every person had to understand the world around them and find a way to survive within it. The medieval community was built on dependence. A single person rarely had everything they needed. Farmers needed craftsmen. Craftsmen needed farmers. Merchants needed producers. Communities worked because different people provided different skills. This connection created a system where everyone's role mattered. A village was not simply a collection of houses. It was a network of relationships. People shared responsibilities. They exchanged goods. They supported each other during difficult periods. This cooperation was one of the reasons medieval communities continued to exist. However, life also required competition. People competed for resources, opportunities, and social status. A successful harvest, a profitable trade, or a valuable skill could change someone's position in society. The medieval world contained both cooperation and rivalry. Another important reality was the importance of reputation. In a small community, a person's actions were remembered. A good reputation could create trust. Trust could create opportunities. A person known for honesty and skill could become respected. This was especially important in trade and craftsmanship. A merchant's success depended on people believing in their reliability. A craftsman's future depended on the quality of their work. Reputation was a form of social wealth. The medieval world also had different ideas about comfort and luxury. For wealthy families, comfort could include large homes, fine clothing, expensive food, and servants. For ordinary people, comfort often meant something simpler: a warm home, enough food, healthy family members, a safe environment. The meaning of a good life depended on a person's circumstances. This shows that human values are shaped by the world people live in. Another fascinating part of medieval society was the importance of craftsmanship in daily life. Before machines produced goods quickly, everything required human hands. A single item could represent hours of effort. The making of clothing, tools, furniture, and buildings required patience. People respected objects because they understood the work behind them. A damaged item was not thrown away easily. It was repaired, maintained, used again. This practical mindset helped people survive in a world with limited resources. The medieval approach to learning was also different. People learned through experience. A young person working beside an expert gained knowledge by watching and practicing. Mistakes were part of learning. Skill developed slowly over time. This created deep expertise. Many medieval crafts required incredible precision and creativity. The buildings and objects left from this era showed the level of ability people possessed. The medieval world also reminds us that ordinary people experienced change. They were not frozen in one moment of history. They saw new ideas appear. They watched towns grow. They experienced different rulers and changing societies. Their world was constantly moving. The image of the Middle Ages as a completely unchanging period does not reflect the full reality. People adapted because they had to. Adaptation was part of survival. Perhaps the most important lesson from medieval people is their resilience. They faced problems without many modern solutions, yet they continued. They rebuilt. They learned. They created. They protected their communities. Their lives prove that human strength is not only measured by comfort or technology, it is also measured by the ability to continue during difficult times. The hidden reality of medieval people reveals a world of ordinary individuals who carried extraordinary responsibilities. Their names may have disappeared, their voices may be quiet, but their influence remains, because every generation is connected to the people who came before. The lives of medieval people were shaped by a constant balance between hardship and hope. They lived in a world where many things were uncertain, but they still created moments of meaning and happiness. One of the strongest parts of medieval society was the ability of people to continue even when circumstances were difficult. They did not have the tools that exist today. They did not have the systems that protect modern societies. But they had experience, cooperation, and determination. These qualities helped them survive. The medieval family was one of the most important foundations of life. A household was not just a place where people lived. It was a place where knowledge, traditions, and responsibilities were shared. Children learned from parents. Parents learned from older generations. Each generation added something to what came before. This created a connection between the past and the future. The family was also a place of emotional support. People experienced joy and sadness together. They celebrated important moments. They faced difficulties together. In a world filled with uncertainty, family bonds were extremely valuable. The medieval workplace was also different from what many people experience today. A person's work was closely connected to their identity. A skilled worker carried pride in what they created. A farmer understood the importance of their contribution. A builder knew that their work could last beyond their own lifetime. People often created things that would be used by future generations. This gave their work a deeper meaning. The medieval economy depended on patience. Production was slower. Trade required planning. Travel required preparation. Everything took more time. This slower pace influenced how people thought about effort and achievement. A person might spend years developing one skill. A community might spend decades creating a major structure. Long-term dedication was part of life. Another important part of medieval society was the connection between people and traditions. Traditions helped communities maintain identity. They told people where they came from. They explained customs and values. They connected individuals to previous generations. However, traditions were not always positive. Some traditions limited people's opportunities. Some social rules created unfair differences. The medieval world contained both wisdom and inequality. It was a society of contradictions. It produced beautiful creations while also containing serious struggles. It developed knowledge while lacking many scientific discoveries. It created strong communities while also creating divisions. This complexity is what makes the era worth studying. The medieval period was not simply dark or golden. It was human. People were trying to solve problems with the understanding they had. They made mistakes. They improved. They adapted. They continued. Another hidden aspect of medieval life was the importance of hope. Even during difficult periods, people looked towards the future. A farmer planted seeds, believing that there would be a harvest. A parent raised a child, believing life would continue. A craftsman created objects, believing they would be useful. Hope was part of survival. Without hope, communities could not continue. The story of medieval people is therefore not only a story of the past. It is a reminder of how humans respond to challenges. People have always faced uncertainty. People have always searched for solutions. People have always wanted connection and security. The medieval world may seem distant, but the emotions of its people remain familiar. They wanted a better tomorrow. They wanted their families to be safe. They wanted their lives to have meaning. And that is what makes their story timeless. The story of medieval people reaches far beyond the walls of castles and the names of rulers. It reaches into the lives of ordinary men and women who worked every day to create a world that could survive. Their history is not only found in battles, royal decisions, or political events. It is found in the quiet moments: a farmer preparing the land, a craftsperson creating something useful, a family sharing a meal, a community helping one another. These moments may seem small, but they were the foundation of civilization. The medieval world teaches us that history is created through countless actions. A society does not exist only because of powerful leaders. It exists because ordinary people continue working, learning, and caring. The people of the Middle Ages faced a reality that was often difficult. They lived with uncertainty. They faced dangerous diseases. They experienced conflicts. They worked through difficult conditions. But they also created beauty. They created music. They created art. They built remarkable structures. They preserved knowledge. They developed traditions that lasted for centuries. Their achievements show that human creativity does not disappear during difficult times. In fact, challenges often reveal the strength of people. The medieval person was not simply someone trying to survive another day. They were someone building a life. They had relationships. They had beliefs. They had dreams. They had memories. They experienced the same basic emotions that people experience today. A medieval parent worried about their children. A medieval worker wanted respect. A medieval family wanted safety. A medieval community wanted peace. These desires connect the past and present. The world around them was different, but the human heart was not. The hidden reality of medieval people is that they were much more than characters in old stories. They were real individuals. They were farmers, builders, merchants, artists, parents, and thinkers. They were people who adapted to their circumstances and found ways to continue. Their lives remind us that progress is not only created by inventions or famous figures. Progress is also created by patience, by cooperation, by everyday effort. The roads we travel, the traditions we follow, and many parts of modern society were influenced by people whose names we will never know. Their contributions may be invisible, but they are everywhere. The medieval era was not simply a time of darkness. It was a time of human experience, a time when people struggled, a time when people created, a time when people survived, and above all, a time when people lived. When we look back at the Middle Ages, we should not only ask what they lacked, we should also ask what they achieved. Because despite limited resources, they built communities. Despite uncertainty, they created hope. Despite challenges, they continued the story of humanity. The hidden reality of medieval people is the story of ordinary humans doing extraordinary things through everyday life. A story of struggle, a story of resilience, a story of connection. A story that proves one timeless truth. History is not only made by those who are remembered. History is also made by those who quietly keep the world moving forward. Even after understanding the major aspects of medieval life, there are still deeper details that reveal how people truly experienced their world. The medieval era was not simply a period of survival. It was a period where people created systems, traditions, and communities that reflected their understanding of life. Every society creates its own way of organizing the world. Medieval people created theirs through family, religion, work, and local relationships. For many ordinary people, identity came from belonging. A person was connected to a village, a profession, a family, and a shared history. This connection gave people a sense of purpose. They were not living alone. They were part of something larger. In modern times, many people move frequently and interact with large numbers of strangers. But in medieval communities, relationships were often deeper because people depended on each other more directly. A neighbor could become essential during difficult times. A skilled worker could become important to the entire community. A trusted person could gain influence without having wealth. Respect was built through actions. The medieval world also shows the importance of patience. People lived in a time where progress was slow. A building project could continue for many years. A craft could take a lifetime to perfect. A family tradition could survive for generations. People understood that some achievements required time. They were familiar with gradual progress. This mindset shaped their approach to life. The value of experience was extremely high. An older person was often respected because they carried knowledge. They remembered past difficulties. They understood traditions. They had lessons that younger generations needed. Age represented survival and wisdom. The transfer of knowledge was one of the greatest achievements of medieval communities. Without modern schools, people still found ways to teach. They taught through observation, they taught through practice, and they taught through stories. Learning was connected to everyday life. A young person did not only study, they participated, they helped, they practiced, they became part of the process. The medieval world was also full of creativity in unexpected places. People decorated simple objects. They created songs for celebrations. They developed unique styles of clothing. They created stories that reflected their hopes and fears. Even ordinary items could contain artistic expression. A person's creativity was not limited by wealth. The desire to create was part of human nature. Another important reality was that medieval people had a strong relationship with risk. They knew that life could change suddenly. This made preparation important. People stored resources, they maintained tools, they planned for difficult seasons. They understood that survival required thinking ahead. Their daily choices were influenced by the possibility of uncertainty. This constant awareness created a different way of looking at life. A peaceful day was valuable. A successful harvest was a reason for gratitude. A healthy family was a blessing. Simple things carried deep meaning. The medieval world also had many examples of cooperation between generations. A skill learned by one person could continue for hundreds of years. A tradition created by one community could influence future societies. The actions of ordinary people created connections across time. This is why studying everyday medieval life is so important. It helps us understand that history is not only about major events, it is also about human experiences. The hidden reality of medieval people shows us that every person leaves an impact. Some impacts are recorded in books. Others exist quietly through traditions, knowledge, and the societies we inherit. The medieval people may have disappeared, but their influence remains. Their lives continue to tell a story of adaptation, a story of humanity, a story of survival. The more we explore medieval life, the more we understand that ordinary people were not just witnesses to history. They were the people who carried history forward. Every generation inherits the work of those who came before. The medieval world was built on countless efforts that were often unnoticed. A village did not exist because of one person. A kingdom did not survive because of one ruler. A civilization continued because millions of people performed everyday tasks. The farmer who grew food, the worker who repaired tools, the builder who created homes, the parent who raised children. Each person played a role. The medieval experience was deeply connected to responsibility. People often understood that their actions affected others. A farmer's success affected the community. A craftsman's work affected customers. A merchant's decisions affected trade. Everyone was connected through a network of dependence. This created a strong sense of duty. The medieval world also had a different relationship with nature. Modern societies often try to control the environment through technology. Medieval people had to cooperate with nature. They watched the seasons carefully. They understood the importance of weather. They respected the power of natural forces. A storm, drought, or harsh winter could completely change their lives. Because of this, they developed a close awareness of their surroundings. The natural world was not something separate from human life. It was part of everyday existence. The way medieval people used resources also reveals their practical thinking. Materials were valuable. Wood, metal, cloth, and food were not easily replaced. People repaired things because they understood their worth. They reused materials because survival required careful choices. This created a culture where objects often lasted longer. The medieval world also reminds us that people have always searched for connection. Gatherings, celebrations, and shared activities were important. People needed moments where they could forget difficulties and enjoy being together. Festivals created breaks from ordinary struggles. Music created emotional connections. Stories created shared memories. Community was not only practical, it was emotional. The medieval period also had many examples of human ambition. Some people wanted to improve their lives, some wanted to learn new skills, some wanted to explore new places, some wanted recognition for their abilities. The desire to grow and achieve existed in every era. Medieval people were not without dreams. They simply pursued them in a different world. Their ambitions were shaped by their environment. For some, success meant gaining land. For others, it meant becoming a respected craftsperson. For others, it meant creating a stable family life. The definition of a meaningful life has always depended on circumstances. Another important aspect of medieval society was memory. Before modern recording methods, memories were preserved through people. Stories were repeated. Traditions were maintained. Lessons were passed down. A community's history lived through its people. This oral tradition kept knowledge alive. It allowed experiences to travel from one generation to another. The medieval world was also full of contrasts. It had beauty and hardship, innovation and limitation, cooperation and inequality, hope and fear. That complexity is what makes the era fascinating. It was not a simple world. It was a human world. The hidden reality of medieval people is that they were constantly creating meaning in their lives. They were not just surviving. They were building relationships. They were protecting knowledge. They were shaping the future. Their story continues because it is not only about the past, it is about the universal human journey. The story of medieval people is a story that goes far beyond the images we usually remember. When we think about the Middle Ages, we often imagine castles, kings, battles, and powerful rulers. But behind those famous stories were millions of ordinary people who lived, worked, loved, struggled, and hoped. They were the true foundation of their world. They were farmers who produced food. They were builders who created homes and communities. They were craftsmen who transformed simple materials into useful objects. They were families who protected traditions and passed knowledge forward. Their names may not appear in history books, but their contributions shaped the future. The reality of medieval life was difficult. People faced diseases without modern medicine. They faced uncertain harvests. They faced dangerous journeys and social limitations. Many people had few choices because of the society they were born into. But their lives were not only defined by hardship. They experienced happiness. They celebrated important moments. They created friendships. They shared stories. They found beauty in simple things. A successful harvest could bring joy. A family gathering could create lasting memories. A peaceful day could feel like a victory. The medieval people understood something that remains true today. Life is not only about comfort. It is also about connection. Their world depended on cooperation. People needed each other. A community survived because individuals worked together. A person's actions could affect many others. This connection created strong bonds between people. The medieval era also teaches us about resilience. Without modern technology, people still solved problems. Without instant communication, they still shared ideas. Without advanced systems, they still built societies. They adapted to challenges using the knowledge and resources they had. Their creativity allowed them to continue. Their determination allowed them to survive. The hidden reality of medieval people is that they were not simply people from a forgotten age. They were humans just like us. They had dreams, they had fears, they wanted security, they wanted their families to be safe, they wanted their lives to have meaning. The distance of centuries does not erase these similarities, because behind every historical event are real human experiences. The medieval world was created by ordinary people doing ordinary things every day, and those ordinary actions became extraordinary over time. A farmer planting seeds, a worker creating tools, a parent teaching a child, a storyteller preserving memories. Each small action became part of a much larger story. The true history of the Middle Ages is not only the story of those who ruled, it is the story of those who continued, those who rebuilt after difficulties, those who protected knowledge, those who created communities, those who carried humanity forward. The hidden reality of medieval people shows us that every generation leaves something behind. Some leave monuments, some leave written records, some leave ideas and traditions. But everyone contributes to history in some way. The medieval people may have lived hundreds of years ago, but their story still matters because their struggles were human. Their hopes were human. Their lives were human. And their greatest legacy is a reminder. Civilization is not built only by the powerful. It is built every day by ordinary people.